Dear listener, step into the gaslit world of Victorian London and the legendary sitting room at 221B Baker Street for the very first adventure in the adventures of Sherlock Holmes. A Scandal in Bohemia is a sparkling tale of royal intrigue, hidden photographs, masterful disguises, and a battle of wits that pits the great Sherlock Holmes against a woman of extraordinary intelligence and courage. Narrated by the ever-loyal Dr. John H. Watson, this story introduces Irene Adler, the only woman who ever truly outshone and outwitted Holmes, earning forever the singular title of the woman. From the opening lines that establish Holmes's unique view of women to the clever fire alarm ruse and the surprising final twist, every observation, every deduction, every heartbeat of tension, and every moment of admiration will unfold here in rich, cinematic detail. Nothing of importance is left untold. Prepare yourself for a story where logic meets wit, and even the greatest detective can be bested by a woman's quick mind. The game is most decidedly afoot. Watson's opening reflection to Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes, she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler. All emotions, and that one particularly, were abhorrent to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. He was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has seen, but as a lover he would have placed himself in a false position. He never spoke of the softer passions, save with a jibe and a sneer. Yet there was but one woman to him, and that woman was the late Irene Adler, of dubious and questionable memory. In the year 1888, I had married and settled into domestic life with my dear wife Mary. My medical practice kept me occupied, and though I saw Holmes less frequently, I followed his remarkable cases through the newspapers with great interest. One evening in March, after attending a patient, my feet carried me almost unconsciously toward Baker Street. As I looked up at the well-remembered windows, I saw the tall, spare figure of my old friend pacing restlessly to and fro, his sharp shadow thrown upon the blind. I rang the bell, and Mrs. Hudson ushered me upstairs with her usual warmth. Reunion and Holmes's deductions. Holmes greeted me with that quick, bright smile I knew so well. "Wedlock suits you," he remarked. "I think, Watson, that you have put on 7.5 pounds since I saw you last." He then proceeded, without turning fully toward me, to describe my recent activities with uncanny accuracy. I had been getting myself very wet lately, and I had a most clumsy and careless servant girl. When I expressed astonishment, Holmes explained with quiet amusement. The leather on the inside of my left shoe showed 6 almost parallel cuts where someone had carelessly scraped round the edges to remove crusted mud. "It is simplicity itself," he said. "My eyes are as good as yours, Watson, yet I see but you do not observe." We settled comfortably by the fire, and Holmes spoke of his recent work, cases that had taken him across Europe and even into Asia, and of his deep study of crime and detection. Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp ring at the bell. A few moments later, a visitor was announced. The man who entered was tall, heavily built, and dressed in the height of luxury. A dark overcoat with a deep blue silk-lined cloak thrown over his shoulders. His face was masked, and he carried himself with an air of command. Holmes, however, had already anticipated much from a letter he had received earlier that day. The peculiar notepaper, of a type manufactured only in Bohemia, and the strong German hand, told their own story. The masked visitor, the King of Bohemia. The visitor introduced himself in a thick German accent as Count von Kram, a Bohemian nobleman acting on behalf of a powerful client. Holmes listened politely for a moment, then calmly interrupted. "Your Majesty had not spoken before I was aware that I was addressing Wilhelm Gottsreich Sigismund von Ormstein, Grand Duke of Kassel-Felstein, and hereditary King of Bohemia." The king started violently, tore off his mask, and revealed a strong, handsome face framed by a commanding presence. "You are right," he admitted. "I am the king. How did you know?" Holmes explained his deductions from the letter and the visitor's bearing. The matter, the king declared, was of the utmost delicacy, one that could shake the thrones of Europe if not handled with absolute discretion. The king then laid out his problem in detail. 5 years earlier, during a lengthy visit to Warsaw, he had made the acquaintance of Irene Adler, a well-known American opera singer and adventuress. She was then 26 years old, possessed of a beautiful face, a voice of remarkable power, and a mind as resolute as any man's. Their relationship had been passionate, and the king had given her a compromising cabinet photograph showing the two of them together. Now, on the eve of his betrothal to Clotilde Lothman von Saxe-Meiningen, the second daughter of the King of Scandinavia, Irene Adler threatened to send the photograph to the Scandinavian royal family on the very day the betrothal was publicly announced. The king had tried everything. Large sums of money offered through intermediaries, and even burglaries of her house at Bryony Lodge and Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood, all had failed. Irene Adler was clever, determined, and always one step ahead. "She has the face of the most beautiful of women," the king said moodily, "and the mind of the most resolute of men. She will do it. I know that she will do it." Holmes's eyes gleamed with intellectual excitement. The photograph was the key. If they could recover it, the scandal would be averted. Holmes accepts the case. Holmes agreed to take the case and asked for a description of Irene Adler and her habits. She lived quietly at Bryony Lodge with a small staff of servants. She drove out every afternoon at 5 and returned at 7. She had few visitors, save one frequent caller, a handsome, dark-haired English lawyer named Godfrey Norton. The king offered any fee Holmes might name and left a gold snuff box as a token. Holmes promised to report the following evening and began his preparations immediately. Holmes's first disguise and investigation the next morning. Holmes left early, disguised as a shabby, drunken groom or ostler, complete with a worn coat, cracked boots, and a red cravat. He returned late in the afternoon, dusty and disheveled, but his eyes sparkled with success. Over a simple meal, he recounted his discoveries. By mingling with the grooms and stable hands near Bryony Lodge, he had learned the daily routine of the household in vivid detail. That very afternoon, he had witnessed a remarkable event. Irene Adler drove out in her carriage, followed shortly by Godfrey Norton in a hansom cab. Holmes, still in disguise, followed them to the Church of St. Monica in the Edgware Road. To his astonishment, he was pulled inside and asked to serve as a witness to their marriage. Irene Adler and Godfrey Norton had wed that very day in a quiet ceremony. Holmes returned to Baker Street with this new piece of information burning in his mind. Irene was now Mrs. Norton, and her circumstances had changed. The clever plan, the fire alarm ruse. Holmes outlined his daring plan to Watson. That evening, they would go to Bryony Lodge. Watson would wait outside near the sitting room window, armed with a smoke rocket, a small device that would produce thick smoke but no real flame or danger. Holmes would gain entry disguised as a simple nonconformist clergyman, complete with white tie and black coat. Once inside, at the right moment, Watson would hurl the rocket through the open window and cry fire. In the resulting panic, Irene Adler would instinctively rush to save her most prized possession, the photograph. Holmes would mark its exact location for later retrieval. As to the photograph, Holmes explained confidently, "Your client may rest in peace. When a woman thinks that her house is on fire, her instinct is at once to rush to the thing which she values most. A married woman grabs at her baby. An unmarried one reaches for her jewel box. In this case, the photograph is clearly what she values most." Watson agreed to play his part, though he felt some unease at the boldness of the scheme. The execution of the plan at Bryony Lodge that evening. As twilight fell over St. John's Wood, Holmes, now convincingly transformed into a kindly, slightly injured clergyman with a white clerical collar and a benevolent expression, knocked on the door of Bryony Lodge. A servant admitted him. Inside the comfortable sitting room, Holmes began a convincing performance, pretending to have been caught in a street scuffle and needing a moment to recover. Watson waited tensely outside, the smoke rocket hidden in his coat. At the prearranged signal, Watson flung the rocket through the open window and shouted "Fire" at the top of his voice. The street erupted in chaos. Servants and neighbors rushed about shouting. Smoke billowed into the room. As Holmes had predicted, Irene Adler sprang up and rushed to a recess near the bell pull, half drawing out a photograph from a hidden compartment. Holmes's sharp eyes marked the exact spot. But in that moment of panic, something shifted. Irene Adler, with her quick intelligence, began to grow suspicious of the clergyman who had appeared so conveniently. The next morning, the twist revealed. The following morning, Holmes, Watson, and the King of Bohemia arrived at Bryony Lodge full of anticipation. They knocked, but the door was answered by a servant who informed them that Miss Irene Adler, now Mrs. Norton, and her husband had left England the previous night for the continent, bound ultimately for America. She had departed hurriedly, but had left a letter addressed to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Esq. In the sitting room, Holmes found the cabinet photograph of Irene Adler alone in evening dress, along with the letter. In elegant handwriting, Irene explained everything. She had recognized Holmes during the fire alarm. She had long been warned that the king might employ the famous detective if he grew desperate. After the incident, she had gone to Baker Street in disguise as a young man to confirm her suspicions. Realizing the game was up, she had decided to keep the original compromising photograph as insurance against any future threat from the king. However, since she was now happily married to a man she loved far more than the king, she promised never to use it unless provoked. She left the portrait of herself as a memento for Holmes. The king was overjoyed that the immediate threat was removed. "What a woman!" he exclaimed. "What a queen she would have made! It is a pity she was not of my own station." He offered Holmes a valuable emerald snake ring as reward. Holmes declined the ring, but requested Irene Adler's photograph instead. The king gladly granted it. Closing narration and Watson's reflection, and so concluded the remarkable case of a scandal in Bohemia. Sherlock Holmes had been beaten, not by brute force or superior numbers, but by the quick wit, keen observation, and presence of mind of a woman. For the rest of his life, whenever he spoke of Irene Adler, it was with a mixture of profound respect and quiet admiration. To him, she was always the woman, the one who had eclipsed all others and bested even the great Sherlock Holmes at his own game of deduction and disguise. Watson later reflected that this adventure was notable not only for preventing a potential European scandal, but because it revealed a side of Holmes few ever saw, a man capable of genuine admiration for an opponent who matched his own brilliance. The photograph Holmes kept as his only souvenir remained a treasured reminder in the Baker Street rooms. If your heart raced during the clever disguises, the tense fire alarm, and the surprising final revelation, then Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has masterfully succeeded in launching his immortal series. The fog of London may lift, but the memory of Irene Adler, clever, beautiful, and resolute, will linger forever. The game, dear listener, is always afoot, and sometimes, even the greatest detective must bow to his superior wit.